Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is July 7, 2024. I want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. Please subscribe. Also want to thank Venice Heritage Museum and Dominic Priori. Christopher, our guest today, did a presentation there, and it really was amazing. Really great presentation. Christopher Merritt, where in the heck you calling in from?
I'm calling in from Tustin, California.
First question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
The best thing for a human being. Wow. You start off with an easy one, huh? The best thing for a human being. I think this is going to sound really like artsy fartsy, but I think it's to pass on positivity. I think that's really important. I
Artsy,
work, yeah, just,
artsy fartsy. I would say that's brilliant, but go ahead. Yeah, I wouldn't say
yeah.
that's artsy fartsy. I would say that's grounded in real. But go ahead,
Well,
elaborate.
I would say that I work in a really volatile industry. And I work in an industry where there's like a lot of stress and it's very, I hesitate to even say Hollywood adjacent, but it's basically of the like entertainment world. And so there's a
Yeah.
lot of, I would say, cutthroat behavior. I mean, I think in my history in my past, I'm in my 50s now. And I work with a lot of younger people now, which is interesting. And I just remember when I was in my 20s, or so, and just kind of starting out, um, how poorly things were handled sometimes by people in positions of authority. And so I think if you're ever like lucky enough to have like a modicum of like authority or responsibility or something, I think that, it's it really behooves you not to pass on things in a negative way, but in a positive way. And even if you're dealing with like a negative situation, trying to put it in a positive way. I think a lot of times, what I guess what I'm alluding to is, as a young theme park designer, I've been, projects, everything's project based in my world. And so when there's all these projects and everyone's busy, it's great. And then when things dry up a bit, everyone kind of scrambles. It's probably similar to the film industry in that case. Um, anyway, the times early in my career where I was like, laid off, sometimes because someone didn't necessarily want me there anymore, or sometimes because just the project dried up and no fault of my own, things are like handled in a bad way,
Yeah.
and I think, so I mean, a good example would be a young person I was working with who was really wonderful, but just kind of, the project kind of went on pause. And, so we had to part ways. And I just thought it was really, it was kind of my responsibility to make that as positive an experience for that person, right? Without getting into it too much. So,
That was Chris, that was really good. And I appreciate feel free to elaborate on anecdotes, stories, tangents. That's what this is all about, to just get a little deeper because what you said also evokes something funny because you went to Cal Arts that I heard about a Cal
mhm.
Arts art teacher is that
Yeah.
he literally didn't teach his students as well as he could because they were potentially going to steal his gallery opportunities.
Oh my
Which
gosh.
is which
It doesn't surprise
sounds which sounds like now, when I've said that to people, I says, "Well, isn't that every industry?" And like, "Well,
me.
no, not necessarily, but there are some in every industry." But some people would say, "Well, it's more in the art." But like you put it in Hollywood or just using the word cutthroat, it's
Right.
like what you're saying, I think applies to all professions in life in general, just like you
Mhm.
say, pass on positiveness. So
Yeah.
that was good. So, what's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
My favorite form of information. Is that just any answer is correct? Because if you're talking about form of information just for like pleasure, right? For just like, of interest, it's got to be, physical books you can hold in your hand. And then my other, I'm kind of a nerdy vinyl record collector.
Yeah.
There's something about the physicality of that and the God, dare I say, almost fetishistic, totemistic, rich. It's a ritual, right? Of like taking
Yeah.
a record out of a package and putting it on a turntable and cleaning it and then it's almost like, you're having, albeit a disconnected one, you're having an interactive moment with the artist or the musician. And same thing with physical books.
Yeah.
Without getting too woo woo on you, I think there's something that happens in a physical way. There's some sort of transfer of knowledge or information or artistry. So you're having, I would say, a deeper relationship with that artist, that author, that musician when you're physically holding something. Not that I don't mostly deal with digital like everyone else does, like we're doing this
Yeah.
interview right now. There's something to that. And I think, you see you see a lot of people that are like, 30 plus years younger than me, like actually like maybe not so much with books, which really actually concerns me, but like with like vinyl records, people collecting vinyl records who don't even have like a record player. It's like, but I think like people are like kind of yearning for something. I think people are kind of
Yeah.
trying to, they want to reach out and they want to have a more personal connection. So I think that's, that mode of transmittal. Even I still, I'm woefully behind on TV shows and films and streaming and all that. And part of the reason for that is because I would much rather go see a film in a theater because
Duh. Yeah.
there's a visceral experience there, right? And maybe I'm kind of
That's
that last generation, but like, my
right.
kids who are all approaching their 20s right now, they'd much rather stay home and watch something.
Yeah.
And I'm the opposite. I'd much rather like
Yeah.
have that experience of like going
Yeah.
sitting down in a darkened theater. So there's something to that, and I'm not sure I
Yeah.
can eloquate it beyond that. So,
That was brilliant. Thank you. And Chris, just in regards to books as a tangent, did you become a book reader, one, because your parents told you, two, they did it as an example, or three, on your own?
I'm gonna say 1 and 3. We always had books growing up as kids, and so I spent a lot of time reading. And certainly, in the 70s, it's just so funny because again, my can you hold on one second? I'm
Yeah.
gonna mute you. Hold on one second. I've got a sick
Yeah.
kid in the background.
Yeah.
Jeez. Hey, Dylan, Dylan, buddy. Hey, hey, Dylan, Dylan, Dylan. I am right in
So
the middle of a live interview, and you are coughing like crazy. You have to go in the other room if you're going to keep
encourage
coughing.
people to check out Chris Merritt's books. Christopher Merritt, several books out. So yeah, that was good.
Sorry
I
about
gave
that. I know we're live and all that. I've got a kid who's sick in the background, trying to get him to stop coughing in the middle of your live stream. Sorry
no
about that.
problem, Christopher. It shows your concern as a dad. That's cool. And I just
Yeah,
gave
but
oh,
what we were talking about, like
yeah,
books, as a little kid, especially like if you were in elementary school and you were homesick, most people had like one TV in their house,
yeah,
right? I mean, you read, and so books are always available to me. I love books. I'm very concerned that it feels like as a society, just because everything's digital now and the
yeah,
prevalence of social media, I'm worried people are reading less, which concerns me because again, I think there's some sort of transfer there with the creator, the author, the person who puts it together. To me, just personally, there's something nice about physically holding something in your hands too.
yeah.
So,
Totally agree. And why do you think humans collect or gather information?
hmm, wow, these are big questions, Jerry. Why do humans collect or gather information? Well, to be blunt, I think life is boring without information, right?
I get that answer. That is good.
Right? Like, aren't you
The
like,
answer I get, Chris, the answer I get the most is survival. But I love when people say,
hmm,
because it's boring, because we need to fill this, like all the digital world you're talking about, content. we didn't
right?
we didn't think, like when you did your books, we didn't think, well, I've got to fill 600 pages or 300 pages with
Oh God,
content.
no.
You
Oh
were
God, no.
But do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented?
Oh, I think it's innate. I think it's a survival thing, right?
Yeah,
if you're a prehistoric human being, you need to gather information that this animal is safe to approach and this animal is likely going to try and kill you, and then you need to have a cost benefit analysis of like what, right, like how hungry am I versus risking death, and take that all the way down into like like subtle like human interactions, right?
Yeah,
Like, I mean, even today, like at a job, you need to go, well, who's in charge? Who's running the company? Who's really my boss?
yeah,
Who's someone in the office that I can trust, and who is someone that maybe I can't and I should be a little more cautious about. So I think information is rooted in survival, but
yeah,
also just boredom. Like, for me, like one of the books I'd love to do in the future, and this kind of springboards off of the Pacific Ocean Park one a bit, is we always, since I'm a theme park designer and I'm also kind of a history nerd, and those are the books that I do, right? Like the theme park history centric books. I'm trying to do books that don't exist, that I would want to read, that I would want to see like in a bookshop, that I would pick up. But one I would want to read, even though there's been a lot of books on Coney Island, is like, what was Coney Island like in the late 1800s and the turn of the century? But like back that up, like with really great photos, really clear photos, like, things that are in the Library of Congress or in private collections. Like they're, like I'm just like over the last couple of years have like, started, it's probably going to be a book at some point. Started working on this and trying to figure it out. Like, well, what attractions happened when? Well, why did they happen? Well, how does that influence the kind of work that I do today? Um, that's always interesting to me, Um, trying to think, even like, again, this is related to Coney Island, but like, turn of the century, like, freak shows and things like that, and like how that's like such a social taboo, and it all kind of went away, started going away in like the 1950s and 1960s for reasons that are probably obvious. But like, what
yeah,
was the genesis of that? How does that relate to entertainment? Things that you don't know a lot about. Or this is another stupidly nerdy thing, but because like I was a teenager in the 80s, you know, so 1980, I was 10 years old. I was right primed for like, the age of arcade video games that kind
yeah,
of really predate, home gaming entertainment, which is what it's all about now. So,
yeah,
I'm interested in that stuff. So I, very foolishly several years ago, bought a few old 1980s arcade machines. I don't know anything about electronics. I
yeah,
don't know how to do these things, but these things break really
yeah,
easily. They weren't designed to last more than a few years, like in a 7-Eleven or something. So I, not that I'm anywhere near capable at all, but like I've had to learn some things about like, board chipsets and like how to take something apart, and
yeah,
like, oh, like there's this weird one quirk to this machine, or a little bit about electricity and using a multimeter, to measure, voltage on something to make sure that the chip is getting, things that I've never thought about, I've never studied. Um, but I'm interested in it, right?
yeah.
I don't know if I'm kind of
But I
going
don't
to.
think it's nerdy. I think it's just you being, again, a historian and a comprehensivist and someone who's curious to maintain these things because they have some importance in our
Mhm.
culture.
Sure.
And so, I mean, the
Yeah.
guy who did the in Venice Boardwalk, that guy who did the freak show, that was amazing. He
Mm.
made money, selling pop music, whatever, Santana, and then he liked this thing of collecting a two-headed turtle and things that we called in freak shows. And to go and see it in this day and age was amazing, and
Yeah.
other things like that. So I think
Yeah.
it's important.
I think,
Next,
or even if I could interrupt you, Jerry, like
oh,
even like, you mentioned my co-author, Dominic Priori, on the POP book. And
yeah,
one of the reasons I wanted to work with Dominic, there are many reasons I wanted to work with Dominic, but
yeah,
just one of them is that he's such an authority on popular music of the 1960s.
yeah,
and others, but specifically the 60s, right? He's written books about Brian Wilson and
Yeah.
the Beach Boys and Riot on Sunset Strip and all these things. And so this is like a whole world. So even though I deeply love music, I don't know a lot about music from the 60s and 70s. And, I mean, I thought, gee, he could bring something to this that I'm really a lot less knowledgeable about, but I'd love to learn a little bit more about. Um, and that goes off to, there's this really wonderful podcast I've been listening to, just trying to turn people on. There's a gentleman out of the UK, and it's called A History of Rock and Roll in 500 Songs.
Yeah.
And it's the class I always wanted to take. And it goes back to the 1940s, or actually 1930s, with swing bands and popular music in some country, and just kind of everything converging to make rock and roll that like we know it today. But he's going song by song, like per episode. It's going to take him, 15 years to get through this thing.
Yeah.
But the guy is so absolutely like deeply, deeply informed. He knows the history of things that, I don't know anything about. So like, oh gosh, I mean, well, Ray Charles is very popular, but some of these more obscure rock and roll artists and who kind of came and went, and how everything just kind of went together. It's the class. It's like the UCLA class that I always wanted to take that doesn't exist, because it's such a long, drawn out thing. So that's like another, so when you talk about information,
Yeah.
when my ritual is to come home at night and like, put a vinyl record on the turntable and listen to it and kind of deeply engage that way, I might know something about history from that podcast. I'm like, oh, this musician is doing this thing and it relates to this, to that. So I
Yeah.
don't know. It's,
No, I
people say,
like that, Chris. I
yeah.
like that, Chris, because I've had that podcast recommended to me, and I also recommend
Mm.
Bob Dylan's book, where he just goes through 50 songs, and there's 2 pages. Have you seen this book that Dylan put out about popular song? Just go in the bookstore and look at it.
No, my father has it. And
Yeah, you loving graphics and beautiful. The graphics are amazing,
I've
and
heard
it
it's
is.
great.
Yeah, it's great, but it's also, I just learned, because I love to know things like Dominic and Brian Chittister, one of his partners.
Yeah,
Those
Brian's another one. Yeah.
Louis Jordan is basically the guy that the real historians say invented rock and roll, but they don't say he invented rock and roll. They say that Rocket 88 is the first rock and roll record. So it's debatable.
Well,
But
that's one of the things I love about this podcast. Is he said you cannot say one song is the genesis. You
right,
cannot say one, right.
right,
Everything is confluences, and so to make it about
right,
the theme park stuff. Same
right,
thing, right? Like rides and attractions and the history of these things, they all influence each other. But I
right.
apologize,
And
I
then
interrupted you. Yeah.
it's getting the big picture and understanding human nature. Ike Turner's on Rocket 88. Most people
Right.
demonize Ike Turner because, he did bad things, but he
Sure.
also was the architect, one of the architects of rock and roll, especially because he's on Rocket 88.
Yeah.
When Louis Jordan was in the hospital at the end of his life, Ike sent him 20 grand and said, don't even say who it's from. I just want to pay tribute to someone who spawned our art form. And to me, that's amazing. And it's just a
Right.
trivial thing, but again, it
Yeah.
is getting this bigger picture. Okay, next question. Do thoughts create emotions?
I kind of look at it the opposite way. I think emotions create thoughts a lot, right? I think you
Amazing.
have a visceral reaction to something, whether it's someone you're in love with that you feel jealous about, someone else giving them attention, or I work in Los Angeles and live in Orange County, and just it's the commute is awful, as you can imagine. And just like,
Yeah.
having someone cut you off or almost causing an accident, you have this visceral reaction, this primal, right? Like your lizard brain kicks in and you have this fight or flight kind of a deal going on.
Yeah.
And I react, right? I think like
Yeah.
everyone does. And then you think about it later and you're either like, oh, that person's an idiot, or you're like, oh, maybe I wasn't paying attention, whatever.
Yeah.
But to me, it's the opposite. It's generating those thoughts.
No, I appreciate that, because someone just the other day said exactly what you said. And Most people go, well, thoughts create emotions and emotions create thought. It's both. Because some of these
Yeah.
either or questions at the beginning, of course, it's both and it depends, but you get what I'm after. We're just here to have discussion. You can go, you don't have to answer the question. But next one is fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until
Mm. I don't know what I think until I sit with it for a bit.
yeah, very good. Because McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I
Mm.
write it. Can humans think
Interesting.
without language?
Mm. Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah.
I would think so. I think, I think we're defined think, but I feel that we're thinking about a bazillion things as babies before we learn how to speak. We're
Yeah.
thinking stove hot. We're thinking dirt in my mouth doesn't taste good, so maybe don't eat that, right? I think.
Yeah. Well, Chomsky says the language is not just words, it's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. Chris,
Mm,
what do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
mm. I think you need to take a time out,
Yeah.
because back to your thing about emotion, a lot of times in situation like that, like emotion runs high and dictates everything. And I think it behooves everyone, rather than to like, no, I've got to resolve whatever this thing is, stepping back and thinking about it for a minute. I think we've all had situations in our lives where we've come in hot or frustrated about something, and for whatever reason, like dealing with that situation, we don't have to deal with that situation until later. And a lot of times I find in my life that's a good thing. I'm like, oh, I'm really glad I didn't have to deal with that in that moment, because I was so pissed off. I
Yeah.
probably would have been handled it really, really badly, versus giving myself some space to think about it, like, well, what really matters there? Well, what do you want out of this situation? Well, what's the most, what I mean?
Yeah.
It's hard to do that with, emotions. Just, I think everyone in the world have made, like, just boneheaded decisions based on your emotions flying out of control.
Well, you anticipated the next question beautifully, and you must have ESP. Your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Hmm. God, I don't know if I can put a ratio on that, Jerry. I think it varies everywhere. I don't think I can
Yeah.
answer that one.
Well, no,
Yeah, I
that's what
don't
I'm
know.
glad, Chris, I welcome saying I can't answer, I don't know. I
Hmm.
don't I'm not trying to put you on the spot because in
Yeah,
essence, we we invented the words thinking and feeling, but they're so interconnected, you can't really
yeah.
separate them. But Bridget Bardot said, when I make love, I don't think. And I'm like, good luck. How do you turn your brain off? And then there's a bumper sticker on a car in my street. It says, don't believe everything you think. And I'm like, well, don't believe everything you feel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I
these,
mean, we as humans, like, we're just constantly like, we're just kind of going like this, right? Like all the time. And yeah, I don't know.
yeah.
Interesting.
Well, here's two questions from Alan Turing in the 50s. One, is
Mm.
thinking a function of the soul?
Mm. Well, you need a definition of what the soul is, but I'm gonna go out on a limb and say, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
And the,
so.
yeah, and the second Turing question is, can machines think?
Mm. Yeah, not in the way that we understand it. I mean, obviously, I don't wanna bog down into a 5-hour talk about AI, which is the hot thing right now. But I th I basically, I mean, computers and AI are doing, high complicated mathematical equations to do something, to replicate something. I think in terms of like stream of consciousness and planning, yeah, isn't like planning inherent to thought? Does
I would
machine learning, does AI plan? I'm not sure that it does. I don't know, but I'm
uh,
certainly uneducated on how it really works, like most of us. Um, I don't, gosh.
no, it's a great question. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
I'm after also is inventing new questions. You can answer a question by asking a new question. So, Chris,
Mhm.
do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Oh boy. I'd love to be lofty and say I pursue meaning, but I think like most of us, I pursue happiness, right? I think most of us are hedonists in some way or another. And I think whether your happiness is making sure you're financially secure, right? And or your happiness is, I don't know, spending too much money on vinyl records
Yeah.
that you're recollecting from when you were a teenager when, reality is like how many times are you going to listen to it before you die? I don't know. But I think most people, I think most people are hedonistic at base, and I think they are pushing towards pleasure or at least comfort above all
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, I got it from Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And he says happiness doesn't tend to last, meaning does.
Mm.
But
Well,
I
I agree with
appreciate,
that.
yeah,
I agree with that. But
yeah,
but we have
mhm,
animalistic urges at our base,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So,
Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
hmm, that's a great question. Never thought about it. I just think it is. I think
Yeah,
consciousness is or isn't.
yeah,
I think it's a binary thing, right? Like
yeah,
I don't think it's I don't think we're ever like I'm 48.9% conscious. I'd like to be 72.3% conscious, so I'm gonna purposely, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how that would. I think
we
you're conscious, you're sentient or not. Now, there's like varying levels of that, right?
yeah,
I mean, like a plant is sentient on some level, right? It's responding
yeah.
to water and light, and they say plants can respond to music, which I don't know. Maybe they can. I don't know. Um, so.
Well, that percentage thing is amazing, you said, Chris, because that's what Lakoff and the neuroscientists tend to say. Oh,
Hmm.
80% of us operating are in a not unconscious or subconscious way. I go, that can't be. Right now, I feel we're both kind of 100% conscious of each other. But there
Yeah.
is something underneath that's happening or bubbling. But it's
Yeah,
very
for sure.
interesting. I like you using the verb is, consciousness is. So
Mm.
what's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Oh, boy. How do you measure speed of thought? Like, how do you
Again,
me
you
how
win. You
right?
win because you're answering with a question. But I know, I mean, how did we
You can
devise a
measure
way?
speed of light, right? Can you
But
me
that's what I'm
you
saying. We convinced ourselves we can measure it. So we kind of said,
mm.
"Oh, yeah." So we could convince ourselves, that we can measure thought, but who knows? I mean, it's
Well, this gets to, like, even, like, I know we're getting really esoteric, which is maybe the point of your whole, your whole channel here, Jerry, I don't know. But, like, this gets into, when you say, like, what's faster, speed of light or speed of thought, and my first thought is like, well, we have to have an agreed upon unit of measurement, right? Like, we have to have an agreed upon, like, way to measure it,
yeah.
and then the next thing I go is like, well, nobody effing agrees on anything anymore, and now, especially in the last, 15 years of our existence as humans, with the way the internet has taken over. And again, I hate to be sound boomer-esque and rant against social media, because I'm on it like everyone else. But but like, I feel like increasingly, like, people are just kind of making their own reality, right?
Yeah,
So when you say, like, what's an agreed upon unit of measurement for speed of thought, which I don't know if there is or not.
yeah,
um, we're increasingly, becoming a society. And when I say society, I just mean like all of humankind around the world. Like, I believe this thing and I don't believe this thing, and whether science or faith or external, pressures or my significant other have anything to do with that. I believe what I believe, and I want to find things, I want I want to listen to and ingest, news, media, information that supports that bias. And so person A over here could have an agreed upon, like, this is how you measure speed of thought. We've done, studied brain waves and studied neurons, and we know like how fast it goes compared to the speed of light. There might be another scientist who has a completely different approach at it, and may
Yeah.
have, to their mind, empirical evidence that supports their hypothesis on this, right? So but the problem is like, I think it's hard for like humans to move forward, certainly in social situations, but also in areas of like science and climate change and fact, when there's less and less an agreed upon, definition of things. And I worry that it's so easy now to live in a bubble. I think we all do it. I certainly do it with my news and media intake. Um, Listen to things that just support what we already believe, rather than like step out of our comfort zone and try, look at like, oh, I never thought about this thing that way. And
Yeah.
so I don't know where I'm going with all
No,
this. It's
you actually it actually articulated what I read a couple years ago. It used to be seeing is believing. Now it's believing is seeing. You only see what you want to believe and reinforce this. But there is a Lily Tomlin quote that applies, and it's reality's a collective hunch. So we have a
mm,
collective hunch that, dude, if I hit this button, I get to talk to Christopher for 90 minutes on
yeah,
a Hollywood Squares,
yeah,
online chat, and that's sort
yeah,
of cool. And what I think you're touching on is something you do. It's called pattern recognition. You study patterns, then you get comprehensive awareness. You get the big picture. And your profession, it seems more than any, is something we'll get into after a few more of these philosophical questions, and
mm,
that is, what's the difference between science and art? Because
mm,
science is like, oh, it's a fact. Well, art is, I'm going to create this ride that people are going to feel free and they're flying, and then all of a sudden the science flubs and they crash, which is
right.
which is rare. But those people got
Yeah,
hung up at a theme park recently, hung
yeah,
up upside down.
yeah,
So that's like the epitome of science and art is, we're going to have fun and be free. And then, whoa, we're going to trust that the science works. I'm going to give you,
yeah.
give me. So what, before we get into science and art and the difference, a couple more, but this kind of
Well, you
goes
you
along.
remind me of, I think, Eddie Sato, a friend of mine who's kind of legendary in the theme park industry too. I don't know if he coined the phrase or just repeated it, but I remember him saying, thrills minus death equals fun.
Yeah.
And that's the science part of like, theme park attractions. Like,
Yeah.
everyone just kind of marches in and goes like, I'm going to get on this thing that's going to whip me around and flip me upside down, and I'm going to trust that I'm not going to die. And I
Yes.
see every right. And then a lot of, like a lot, I mean, I worked on Shanghai Disneyland and went out and visited a lot of like regional, I hesitate to call them theme parks, but amusement parks in China.
Yeah.
And just, like a lot of these places, the safety is really lacking, shall we
Is
say.
it really?
But you
Wow.
still like, you see people like, they come into a theme park situation and they just kind of trust. They go, well,
And
I'm just
trust.
going to put my life
Yep.
in your hands. And this is where then, when you start talking about Pacific Ocean Park in the book that you saw me lecture on, it's like, increasingly those were like, not well maintained attractions the Venice and Lick piers there. People could easily die. That was one of the things on the Pacific Ocean Park, the Sky Bubble ride, the Skyway ride. It's these glass spheres that they lock you into, and they send you on a cable out over the ocean and back again. And one of the designers I knew, he said, I always was horrified as a little kid because I thought if that thing falls off, you're trapped inside and you're going to slowly drown while everyone watches you, which probably could have happened. I don't know, but I just think
Yeah.
it's interesting that we, of course, all the companies that I've worked for, they have a whole team of engineers and safety experts, and you have to so when you're doing artistic design, you have to factor some of those known quantities into that. So certainly, rides and attractions are as absolutely safe as they can be made today. But it's just interesting that,
Yeah.
I mean, but we all get in planes every day too, and planes can kill you. We could get on the
And we
freeway.
get in
I
cars.
could go drive to Costco and I could get, hit,
Yeah.
in an intersection. So I don't know.
Yeah, 'cause we trust cars. My friend always goes, "It's amazing how there aren't more car accidents." But
Right.
this trust thing is amazing, especially when you edged it into the word death. But I just found out from my friend of like 30 years. I never knew this. He's afraid to go in elevators, and he's a
Mm.
macho weightlifter. He's like he's a hell. I couldn't believe that he will go in an airplane, but he won't go in he'll. And I was like, what? And it was just shocking to me that he revealed it at this point. It was just never had to come up. But that word
Mm.
trust is huge. So it's sort
Mm.
of in this world, but what we're talking about, but it's a poet, and her name is Audre Lorde. And she said, you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. And Yvonne Rainer, her colleague, says, well, you can if you expose the tools. So my question is, what new tool do you suggest?
Yeah. And I don't even know what that. I was like, what does that mean? You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. What does that
Right,
mean,
and
Jerry?
just to put it in context, she's a Black poet. I think she's
Mm-hmm.
gay, and she's
Mm-hmm.
probably talking about white supremacy, but being
Okay.
a poet, it's
Oh, okay.
metaphorical. And so really what I'm asking is, because I asked some of these
Mm-hmm.
questions with cute quotes before, you don't have to apply them. Like I said, you put in the context you want. Really
Sure.
what I'm
Yeah.
asking, what
Yeah.
tool do you gravitate towards? And then do you say, well, dismantling the master's house is like changing the
Mm.
authority, and then maybe just exposing the authority, or just what tool do you gravitate towards? Because I do like Frank Zappa's example. He said, who are the brain police? He didn't say, oh, the brain police are capitalist consumers, or the brain police are the voice inside your head. He just asked the question. So it's
Mm-hmm.
basically, what tool do you gravitate towards?
Mm. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a personal thing. I mean, I think if you're talking about like in the work that I do, the
Yeah.
theme park design, the tool that I gravitate towards, um, this sounds really stupid, but like I channel my inner nerd, I
That's
guess.
that's not
Um,
stupid.
well, because I just think about like, because what happens, and it's actually a disappointing part
Yeah,
of working in the theme park world, is what happens is 9 times out of 10, when you're working on something, it's based on an existing IP. So a film or a science fiction
yeah,
franchise or a series of films or a cartoon where there's a set world and there's a set of rules and there's
yeah.
a visual and a shape language and there's things that we all key into. So so if I'm going to say, I don't know, Star Trek, for example, people who are like uber fans of Star Trek, if you were to say, hey, if I was going to do an attraction based around Star Trek, the first question would be, well, is it the original series or is it the next generation or one of these other
Yeah.
offshoots, and then there are certain iconic elements within that. Well, you've got to have the thing, if you're doing the original series, you got to have the thing with the tribbles, because that's like infamous, the trouble with tribbles, and you got to do this, and you got to make Spock's harp, and you got to make, a nomad feature in one of them. I don't know. Anyway, when
But
you
it
ask,
is
a,
it
yeah,
it's like it's the history of humanity and creative arts. That's what Joyce did with Ulysses. He just says, well, I'm
mhm,
going to take the Odyssey, which has a template, it's already set
mhm,
up, and then I'm going to recreate it in some other means. I mean, really, you're anticipating two more questions down. But
yeah.
we're going to get into your profession a lot deeper.
Oh,
But
okay, all right.
what new toy do you suggest?
What new toy do I suggest? New toy. Wow. This is awful because it's really controversial right now, and but I started a couple months ago, about 6 months ago, I just started playing with AI just to see what it would spit
Yeah,
out
yeah,
visually.
yeah.
Um, and it's really interesting, and it's funny because I don't even know how to put it in words, but there's a look, like, if you play with AI, like art AI, long enough, there's a look to it, and I don't know what, there's probably some great adjective someone's already come up with on what it is, but you see things, or at least I see things that are generated in AI now, and I'm like, oh, that's generated in AI.
Yeah,
And if you ask me to break it down for you, go, well, why does this real photo versus this thing? And I probably couldn't eloquate it to you. It's some sort of a gut visceral thing.
that's it. It's
Um,
intuition. It's intuition. It's back to Lily
yeah.
Tomlin's your
But
hunch.
that said, it's interesting, and what I'm starting to find too is most of the companies that I do work for, AI has gotten so controversial for many, many reasons, that a lot of these other companies do not want you doing anything regarded to AI, which is
Wow. Well,
interesting
how
to me.
can they tell? You could,
Oh,
I know.
I don't know. Well, that's back to what I just said, right? Like, there's a look, right?
Yeah,
There's a.
yeah, but I have writers who run their essays 2 or 3 times through AI. I haven't
Mhm.
done it. I wanna do it. My wife's a
Mm,
professional songwriter. She would never,
right.
she's old school like you. She hit a button on her cell phone by mistake, and it was AI helped her write a song, and she like, "Oh, this is fun." She could not tell people, or she could say, "I co-wrote a song with AI." And,
Yeah.
it's still like her. But I'm just curious with your AI exploration. Do you use Dolly, or what program did you use? Do you know?
I was using Midjourney. Uh,
Midjourney? Yeah.
yeah, and then again, that was very, very
Yeah.
interesting. I mean, I'm kind of a fan of Art Nouveau and Art
Yeah.
Deco, and so I was playing
Yeah.
with some things, related to that, and it would make these incredibly complicated. Although there's artifacts and weird, because it's a computer, putting things together, and then
Yeah.
there's the moral question of, being like a working artist, because my history, and is draw, hand drawing by design. I'm a throwback at this point, right? Like, I'm the old guy who draws by hand. And you think about, like, well, AI is just scraping the internet for every single example, so that they can take, a little bit here and a little bit there and generate this thing. But artists who create the art are not being compensated for it, and they're rightfully pissed off about it,
But
because
Chris, when you
it's
traced
yeah.
Mark, Mark Davis, right? Mark
Hmm.
Davis. When you traced him as a kid, what's the
Yeah.
difference than AI pulling Mark out of the canon of illustration?
That's a really good point. Although I would just say my personal experience was, tracing Mark Davis drawings and Sam McKim drawings, who did this
Yeah,
amazing map behind me, by the way. Um, and kind of figuring out, like, oh, this is how you draw an arm, or this is
yeah,
how you do, or this is how you put a thing in front of a thing so
yeah.
it reads. I was really lucky enough to get to know these people because they all
But did
lived in
they
Southern
go
California.
But Chris, did he go, "Give me some kickback, dude. You ripped my style off. I
No,
taught you." So, I mean, that's
no,
what AI is doing. So I understand, but
yeah.
it's like IP is an interesting thing. It's really deep. Okay, let's go to the next one because
Yeah.
again, everything we talk about will come back around.
Mm,
This is really one. I love what you're doing because we're really getting deep into this.
mm.
What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Money, like everyone else.
That is great.
Yeah, that's a no-brainer.
Okay, McLuhan learned from a poet that artists are the antenna of the race. They're
Mm,
broadcasting and detecting
mm.
the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, so we might be able to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So I ask you, Chris, the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions?
Right. So let's go to the pen.
Wow.
We don't know what the pencil did to us. We just embraced it. But we know someone can misuse a pencil and hurt someone with a pencil. But
Sure.
your tool, one of your main tools has always been a pencil or a writing utensil. So
Right.
there's hidden psychic effects of that. But the basic, like, why do you invent a pencil? Well, to draw. Well, why don't you just use your finger in sand? So we keep inventing new things, but we don't really figure out how they shape our behavior. We just embrace them. So
No,
then
we
the
don't, but, like, as a species, we're never gonna stop inventing things that are both
well, I'm
positive and
all for
negative.
that. That's
Yeah.
that's the main McLuhan thing. The most human thing is technology, is inventing things. So then
Mhm.
people go, well, I'm leery of it, like you are. You said I'm leery of AI, and they might,
Well,
but I
I'm
mean,
both
they're not
yeah,
leery.
I
I don't mean
I'm both leery, and I'm also
yeah,
pissed off about the companies that are scraping the internet and stealing people's art and people aren't getting
right,
paid for. I'm also fascinated. I'm like,
right,
I can put in a string of words that are descriptive enough, and it will generate something that
yeah,
no one's ever seen before based on the way I put those words in
right.
order or put, like that's like alchemy, right? Like
That's exact.
that's the equivalent of like someone coming up with the philosopher's stone in the 1400s or something. I don't know. It's
That's the
crazy.
alchemy word is it, Mark. I mean,
Yeah,
Chris,
yeah.
that's the alchemy word is it because that's art and science. But I'm talking about like, look at when the chef documentary Barbeau or whatever his name is came
Mm,
out, and the guy put a computer generated voice. They had enough of his voice anyways, narrating the film, but a
mm.
couple lines they had a computer do his voice. And no one knew. And then they got busted. They go, well, you should have told us. He says, why did I have to tell you? Why is there a rule? And then the Warhol documentary came out, and every time they used a computer generated Warhol voice, they had a little thing that just distracted me. It sounded just like
Yeah.
they
Well,
could do it at the end. So we're in the like, here's the one thing I've heard. We're in the infant stage of AI. Our job is to raise it well. So I'm just saying the question is that artists tend to go beyond functionality of art and they do what you're involved in is the imagination. So they
yeah.
do things they don't even know why they're doing it sometimes. And
Yeah.
sometimes that art reveals some of these hidden psychic effects of our invention sometimes. And then what McLuhan is saying, we ignore it. Why do we ignore what the artists are kind of really, maybe deeply saying? Is the question really?
Why do we ignore it?
Yeah,
Because because everyone's trying to get from point A to point B all the time, and they're not concerned with nuance.
yeah,
I
not
think,
concerned with nuance.
and that's the thing is like, so when you again to like bring it back to like some of the books I've done, I've certainly been accused with good reason that the kind of books I do are kind of exhaustive in
Yeah,
a lot of ways. Like there's like a lot, like I definitely go down rabbit holes that I think maybe a lot of people wouldn't, or like, oh, like that's too deep. But like, but there's some, but I'm never like like chasing something in my books or trying to like get into something that there isn't some sort of reason for it, right?
You have backup.
And yeah. So anyway,
No,
like, so when you say, but back to like AI, like when you say raise it well, I don't know. I mean, like, I just think all I could say is like, it behooves us as like human beings and like, adhering to social contract, whatever that means to you,
yeah,
not, not taking your clothes off and running around screaming at people in the street, but actually
yeah,
like being a member of like
yeah,
society. Like like every invention can be used for good or for evil, right?
yeah,
So it's
yeah,
like when you say alchemy, that can be positive alchemy or that can be negative alchemy. So are there
exactly.
people using AI for really bad stuff right now? Absolutely. Are there people using AI that are basically turning it into a new art form and a new way of creating things, or even better, giving someone somewhere who maybe doesn't have a lot of money or a lot of chance in life, but they're
Yeah,
able to go to the library and they're able to use the computers at the library and they're able to learn things that they wouldn't necessarily learn. And maybe there's like the next amazing person who's going to like invent something that will change our someone who could do something about like fixing or holding off climate change, right? Like
hello.
someone who would have not had a chance otherwise. I just think, this is very Pollyanna-ish of me to say, but I just think it behooves everyone to make a choice.
Yeah,
Are you going to put out positivity or are you going to put out negativity? And I guess for me, increasingly, the older I get, I'm just like, I'm not interested in like, as much as I'm still salty about it, like how maybe someone treated me in my 20s who was
yeah,
in a position of authority over me and just kind of, for whatever reason they did, whether it was
yeah,
personal, maybe it wasn't, who knows, I don't know, but put me in a position that made me feel very resentful and angry about if I'm ever in a position of authority over, seeing someone at the work that I do, and they screw up on something, is it going to be payback time? Or am I going to use that as a teach, like as a learning, as a teaching moment and say, you know what, like, I know this didn't happen the way it was supposed to. Here's what I think, but here's where I think you could do better. And by the way, here's what happened to me in a certain situation like that. And this is kind of how I worked through it. Like, I just think, so if you're using AI, use AI for like good, positive stuff and don't steal from other artists. And
yeah,
if you're inventing, I don't know, a vaccine,
yeah,
you know, I don't know, just do good things to help people as much as you can, and everything else is kind of noise. I don't
yeah.
know. This is a
No, Chris,
very I had a
that
feeling this was going to be a very interesting conversation.
well, Chris, it was really good what you said because it was two. One of McLuhan's main probes is how do you turn a breakdown into a breakthrough, and that's what you said. Okay,
Mm,
this rejection into a redirection. How do you
mm,
flip a negative into a positive? And then you nailed it. You said by storytelling. Then you
mhm,
told the story to pass it on. So, but
mm.
again, you anticipate the next question: do artists have moral obligation?
Yeah, I kind of feel like they do. It's kind of like maybe big-headed of me to say, so maybe they don't, but I kind of feel they do. I feel like if you're an artist, and that takes so many forms, right? It's such a broad term. Like are you a musician? Are you a painter? Are you a writer? Are you a creator? Are you someone who manages people who do all that, but you bring your own,
Yeah.
creativity to that? Um, yeah, I mean, I think I lost my train of thought a little bit there, Jerry, but
Well, we'll it will come back. It was moral obligation, and you're right. See,
well,
it's
I
hard.
think I think you have I think you do have an obligation to put new and wonderful and interesting things out there, whatever form that
Yeah.
takes. If that answers the question.
No, it does because people
Hmm.
like wanna say, well, of course, we all have moral obligation, but sometimes art is like my philosophy is great art fucks your shit up and says,
Mhm.
I can do that. But it doesn't mean it has to be
Yeah.
a mean-spirited negative thing, but sometimes art is almost going into that realm of what your friend taught you, thrills minus death equals fun. So, death can,
Well,
I'm not a fan of horror films. I won't even watch them. But
right.
why do we have to create this stuff? But for some reason it does something. And
Yeah.
why is the history of cinema guns? I don't know, but I think you stressing positiveness is where we
Well, and it's interesting too, you mentioned Zappa before, and whenever I think of Zappa, I go right to Captain Beefheart, right? So like for years, musicians that I admire are like Trout Mask Replica, man, you got to do Trout Mask Replica, and and I'm like, okay, I have tried to listen to Trout Mask Replica about 4 times, and I can't get it. And my son, my 19-year-old son, who's a musician, freaking loves it. He's like, "Do you
Oh
see?"
my
He's like,
God.
"Do you see what he's doing? And do you see what everyone else in the band is doing, both different and the same?" And I'm like, "No, I don't. It sounds like a bunch of noise to me, right?" But regardless, I might get that someday, right?
You
Like
might get it and you
I
might
might
not.
I'm like
Yeah,
there have been records and music and things that I've listened to that I'm like, all right, whatever. And then at some point later I get it. Like it comes crashing
yeah,
and I'm like, oh my God. That's the most, like there's I don't know if you know the band Sparks,
yeah,
but there was this wonderful documentary that came out about 4 years
yeah,
ago about the
yeah,
band Sparks. And I didn't like, I was a teenager in the 80s. They had a few hit, they were never really big. And I was just,
yeah.
anyway, so this documentary got me exploring, and I had this like epiphany. I was like, oh my God, like Sparks is like the most important band that influenced all the other bands that I love, like growing up, and went and saw them, at the Disney concert. I mean, just I was obsessed. And then I kind
Yeah.
of burned out. Then I kind of got into them a little too much, and then I kind of burned myself out. But anyway, I guess my long-winded point is like, artists, creating art, was the question that there has to be it wasn't morals. What was your question? It
Well,
was
that was it. Do they have a moral obligation? People go, they have a moral obligation to themselves, but it's like
yeah,
also
yeah, yeah.
what defines the word moral? That's where you're getting into problems. Because okay, I'll give you the extreme is Jello Biafra and Dead Kennedys
Yeah.
have a song called Kill the Poor.
Right, yeah.
2 months ago, a guy went to 7-Eleven and killed a poor person. Did he listen to the song and did it affect him? No,
Well,
Jello,
it's like
but Jello didn't
it's
do
like
that.
it's like it's like people who are right-wing Christian nationalists loving Rage Against the Machine and like
Oh,
unironically playing the song Killing in the Name, which is
yeah,
all like the antithesis of that kind of
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Christo-fascist, you know what I mean? But
yeah,
it's you can't, like, not everyone's going to get everything, and obviously like what Biafra was doing and continues to do, so much of which is tongue in cheek. I think it's
yeah.
that
But
that's that's
you're
hard because
about the Beefheart thing is great because I
yeah.
worked for Zappa for 10 years and
Mhm.
I knew Captain Beefheart. And of course, um, people counterculturally correctness, Chris, is you're supposed to like Beefheart over Zappa. Like he's
Is
better.
it?
Your son gay, and I totally understand. That's not to give Beefheart as a
Well,
norm thing, but
my
that's all right. But
yeah,
your
and
son,
my son is a musician and I'm not. I just listen, right? And I know
but
what
it
I
is
like.
cool that he got him. But here's
Yeah.
the next step. Both of you should listen to the Shags and then see what you guys think about the Shags because they're
Mm.
rated the first band in the history of the world. And
Well,
Zappa,
I mean, I only know them because of Dr. Demento, but
right,
there's a brilliance in that naivete, right? Like
naivety,
there's
yeah.
eh,
So when you play the Shags for your son, I'm just curious if he liked Beefheart
I'm
and
sure I've played It's Halloween for them, but
oh,
yeah,
okay, you've
it's
already
yeah.
done it. Good. Okay.
Yeah, but
That
yeah,
was a
it's
great
like yeah, I don't know, there's something, and then there's something like weird to like what's the word I want? Like, is not naivete, but it's just like, they call it, what do they call it in art? They call it
outsider music. Or
outsider or naive folk art or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
And you can't, like, while it might not have like technical chops, like you can't deny like there's something there. There's something visceral
yeah.
there to it. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. No, it's I mean, I had a friend once. Everybody kind of likes the Shags, and one guy goes, "I don't get the Shags, dude." I says,
Mm.
"That's fine. I'm glad that we have this thing." Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Ooh. I think I'm more afraid of old ideas only in that, like, when you say old ideas, I immediately go to like repressive repressive belief systems that,
Yeah,
want, that are, racist or misogynistic or,
yeah,
super rooted in orthodoxy. I think orthodoxy is never a good thing. But yeah, I think, but and also I'd like to think, although I'm certainly a Luddite in certain aspects of my life, I like to think that like new ideas, there's this, I mean, this is people who use this all the time are probably going to laugh at me if anyone's watching this that knows this, but like, on a project I was working on recently, there's an online, basically, like if I'm working on something, if I'm working on an idea for a ride or an attraction, I'll call it a charrette or whatever, where a bunch of artists will get together, hopefully in a room, hopefully in person. That's my preference, but not so much these days.
yeah,
Anyway, everyone's like, we're talking, hey, this thing could do this thing, and what could this thing look like? And so you're literally either writing down like words on 3x5 index cards, or you're doing little rough thumbnail sketches, or you're doing a little bit better. Anyway, everyone's push pinning all this stuff to the wall,
yeah,
right? And like you have this charrette, and you're talking for a couple of hours, and then after it all, you've got all this shit all over the wall, and you're looking at it, and you're like, oh, well, I like this part of this, and this we could take, you know what I mean? It's like, it's how you generate ideas.
yeah,
Anyway, there's so a lot of, at the company I work for, there's a lot of people, I'm based in Los Angeles. There's a person based in Utah. There are people in Mexico City. There's one guy in Spain. Several of our team members are in Orlando. And so anyway, so we're all like trying to do this from all these areas around the world. And there's this thing that I didn't know about, one of the artists I work with, called a Miro board,
yeah,
Miro board. Anyway, it's a way to put graphics like you would push pin it to the wall on a web page. And
yeah,
everyone can access it, and everyone can look at it and zoom in, and you can take things and move them around, and you can add little notations, just like you would in a conference room.
yeah.
um, I'd not heard of it, and I'm sure it's been around for a while, so people are going to laugh at me. It's like saying like, I heard about this new thing called Photoshop. But anyway, it was like, I'm like, this is great. Like, this is amazing. This is so easy,
Right.
because then this person who did this sketch can go up here, and we can put them in order, and
Yeah.
we can have them arranged by date. I don't know. It's just, kind of
No,
me
it's that's
dumbly,
a
blindly wandering into a new thing. But I'm like, wow, like that is so cool. There's a new idea.
Chris, that's partly why I do this, because I constantly learn new things, and that's, what I like to do. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Yeah. I think one of my very earliest memories is playing outside the backyard of my house, and they had it's a weird thing in the 70s, like gas stations at some point did promotional things where they gave toys out to kids.
Yeah,
Anyway, there was some sort of anyway, I always loved animals, and there was this, I had like a little collection of like little plastic animals. And I remember I had this radioactive mustard yellow colored little moose character. And I remember
yeah,
playing with that in the backyard. I was probably like 1 or 2 years old.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
memory more a curse or more a blessing?
It's both.
Yeah,
Because I think we can get caught up in our memories. We're trying to chase something or recreate something that you just can't, but it also drives you like a big, again, I'm sorry, I'm just doing constant humble brag, this whole thing about my books, but I assume that's one of the reasons you're interested in talking to me. And anyway, so the books that I've done, so I've done 3 books so far: a book on the history of Knott's Berry Farm, a book on Pacific Ocean Park, and a book on Mark Davis and all the designs he did for all the Disney theme parks in the 1960s and 70s. And um, all 3 of those books have a commonality in that, like, there are things in there that, like, that I didn't know about, right? That I was really interested in getting out there and sharing with people that I think are interesting. And my next 2 books are the same deal, right? And my next two books there's one that's all about artist named Rolly Crump and all his designs for Knott's Berry Farm in the 1970s, but also that Marion Knott, who really was the first woman theme park creative executive that I know of in history. So it's also about her. It's also about a lot of other things. And then I'm doing a book on Disneyland's 70th anniversary next summer coming out, because next year is the 70th anniversary of Disneyland. And so anyway, all these books like have little rabbit holes and obscure things and interesting things that are very much of interest to me. I'm so sorry, Jerry. I believe I was answering your question. What was the question again at the beginning? Can you
No,
remind me?
you answered it. It was is memory more a curse or more a blessing? And Chris,
So I was going to say my books are about memory in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Like I'm trying to preserve, like literally the name of my first book is Knott's Preserved.
Yeah.
I'm trying to like, here's this thing that really influenced me as a little kid. And there's hardly any photos of it and people don't remember it and it's gone, right?
Yeah.
That's a big reason I put these books together, because the interesting thing about, you know, theme park history versus say if you're writing about film history, you know, if you want to go watch Citizen Kane,
Yeah.
you can go pop in the Criterion Blu-ray and you can
Yeah.
get an experience that's probably pretty similar to how it was
Yeah.
when it first came out. I think the original cuts still exist.
Yeah.
Other films don't. But my long-winded point is like you know, like if I want to, you know, if I want to watch Double Indemnity, I can watch it pretty much and have the same experience that people had when it came out. If I want to experience the old Disney ride Adventure Through Inner Space, which was mostly projection and lighting on minimalist show sets, it was kind of a surreal attraction of all things for Disney. I can't really do that because it was torn out before home video cameras were able to capture that kind of low light stuff. There's photos, but a lot of the photos are all washed out because it was all dark and with projections. Also, you just can't experience it the way that people experienced it, where you can get on that ride and go through it, which is how you're meant to experience it. So when you say memory, like I'm trying to, like, I have this shady Zapruder-esque memory of a ride that influenced me as a kid. I want to put everything I can in a book and go, here's what this thing was, you know, and if it speaks to you, great. And if not, that's okay too. But that's kind of my deal. So yeah, history and memory it's also a curse because you're trying to chase something or recreate something that maybe you don't remember in the way that you thought you did. Like, I'm sorry, I'll stop. I know I'm sure you got other questions, but I'll stop after this one. But like, there was something that was interesting to me. Like, there was a point in the 1990s where there was a huge amount of nostalgia for people who were little kids in the 70s and all the TV shows and stuff we watched. So Sid and Marty Krofft did all these like amazing shows and like HR Puffin stuff and all these crazy, you know, things that I grew up on, and some of which had been playing in reruns, so I was still kind of knew what they were, but a lot of them hadn't. Anyway, in the 90s, there was this resurgence, and I remember there was this they turned it into a really awful film, but there's a TV show, Land of the Lost, that I used to watch as a little kid about, you know, family who goes back and they're in the land of the dinosaurs and Sleestaks and whatever. I just remember, oh, that was so great. And then like I'm in my 20s and I track down an episode of it and I'm like, this is garbage. This is like the worst hot garbage. Like it's so bad. It's so boring. But because it was like when I was a really little kid and that when that window is really wide open of things that influence you throughout your life, I still had this strong positive memory of it.
Yeah.
So that's the other weird thing about, you know, like memory could be a curse because yeah, you have a nostalgic memory of something just because it took place at that time in your life. It doesn't mean necessarily it holds up now. But a lot of times it does too. So
it happened to me, Chris, when I was a kid. Invaders from Mars blew my shit out watching it on TV. I get out here in 80. I go to LACMA, the big art museum, and see it on a big movie screen in an art museum. And I'm like, this is, you know, it was so cheesy at times, but I know how it affected me as a kid. So it's that setting, this setting and set. But you know, what the next question entails is growing up Tell me someone within your immediate family who had an impact on you, sort of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact? So it's within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family.
Well, within my immediate family, I mean, I think our parents are always role models to us, but I think my dad was a television newscaster. There's a retirement community out here you might have heard of. Used to be called Leisure World, and I think the
Yeah,
Seal Beach one is still is. The one in Orange County here is called Laguna Woods now, and
yeah,
it literally is a city. It's like a city of retirement communities. Anyway, they had their own closed circuit television station. They still do. That just serves the community, which is not so much a big deal now, but back in the early 70s, it certainly was. And so, it's one of the reasons I'm a theme park nut and kind of grew up with it, because my dad basically was like the Will Ferrell character Anchorman. If you've seen the
yeah,
Anchorman movies,
yeah,
it was a lot like that, fashion included. But my dad got free. We certainly weren't wealthy, but my dad got free press passes to like go to Disneyland and Knott's and Universal Studios and SeaWorld. And so I had this amazing childhood where I got to go to these places a lot. And it's one of the reasons I'm kind of a nut and wanted to do it, as a career.
yeah,
But what was interesting to me, I mean, certainly both my parents are role models to me, my mom and my dad, for different ways. But one thing that was interesting about my dad was on TV every day, and my dad was a newscaster. My dad interviewed people, right? And
yeah,
so to have that kind of like confidence and being able to speak and like, off the cuff, like you and I are doing right now,
yeah.
that was always impressive to me. But what's interesting about it is he's like an extreme introvert, actually. And he
Wow,
actually he'd rather die than like go to a party, right? Right, and
wow.
have to make small talk with people, but like that's what he did for his job. And so it was all very much a performance. And I'm not saying like I'm fully performing today, but like, is my comfort zone to talk to you right now about these giant questions you're throwing my way? Probably not. Like I just got back from a little mini vacation, and I've got to go after this. I've got to go do bills and groceries and laundry and get ready for my work week, which starts again tomorrow, right? Like, so like it's interesting to me because like there's part of me that really actually does enjoy it and talking to people like you and I
Yeah,
know. And there's part of me that like no, like I would rather be not having to deal with anything of anyone right now and just kind of like hide out a bit. So I thought that was really interesting that he was able to
yeah,
turn it
your
on and
dad.
turn it off like that.
But yeah, what's beautiful, Chris, is that you can articulate that. Now,
Mm.
just because you brought up your mom, what's one main thing you got from your mom?
Oh, I this sounds so arrogant, but I guess my intelligence and my sense of wonder about things.
Yeah,
I'm definitely fascinated about things. Like what was it? There was some, oh gosh, now of course I can't remember exactly what it was. There was some bug. Anyway, there was some bug that like how some bugs like to survive, they do camouflage like on their thorax or something, and they
yeah,
do like, a scary face or something to ward off other predators.
yeah,
It was something like that. And I think it was something like someone's actually like some bugs like back section actually grew like fake, like looked like a totally other creature, like a
yeah,
terrifying creature. And I'm just like, what is going on? Like on an evolutionary level and a biologic level
yeah,
that is making probably over a million years, making that animal morph into whatever that is.
yeah.
I don't know.
So,
Things like that are fascinating to me, and I'm sure like the people I work with are like, "Oh my god, like shut up about it, finally, Chris." But like, I'll be like, "You got to
Chris,
see this bug. Like, you got to see this bug. This bug does this thing." And so anyway, like that again to pull it back to the theme park world. That was one thing. Is like so. This next one of these next two books that I'm doing is on. So look up Rolly Crump.
yeah,
He
no,
actually he had a shop in Venice for a while. Actually,
wow.
he did beatnik posters. Yeah, look up Rolly Crump.
Oh my God, I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
he along with Mark and Alice Davis was a huge influence on me. So it's one of the reasons I'm doing this book.
Yeah,
His son Chris is one of my best friends.
Wow.
Rowley is an amazing genius. Just passed
Well,
away the other year. But anyway, when I was in my 20s and I was trying to break into the theme park world and specifically Disney, uh, he um, he had a avocado ranch out in Fallbrook at the time.
yeah,
And I was bugging all these old guys who worked with Walt Disney because I'm like, how do you get in the theme park? Like there was no book, there was no like, now
right.
there's like course studies at universities, but like back in the late 80s, early 90s, that how do you learn this? You don't.
Yeah.
There's no book, there's no thing. So I was tracking these guys down and talking to them. So anyway, so Rolly like said, all right, kid, come on out. And he sat me down under an avocado tree on his property, and he told me like the whole, like he burned, like set my hair on fire with all the awful stories of everything he went through working at Disney in the 60s and early 70s, and all the politics and all that. And he said, so kid, you still want to do it? And I'm like, yeah, like I'm in my 20s. I'm like, yeah, I want to do it. Sure. Like having no idea what I'm signing up for. But anyway, he's like, okay. And he goes, well, here's one thing I can tell you that he said I learned from Walt Disney, and that Walt kind of told me, and like I try and tell people, and that's to be a student of life, right? To
Oh,
be
that is
to be
great.
a be fat, it's like people would come to Rolly Crump or a lot of these other older, first generation Imagineers and say, how do you become a theme park designer? How do you work for Imagineering? How do there's so many other companies than Imagineering now, but like, how do you do it? And he said, I always tell them, like, be a student of life. He said, that's what Walt Disney was. That's what I try to be. Like I try to find something fascinating in everything I do. And you can find, things in a million ways. I mean, my co-author on the Knots book, a gentleman named Eric Linksweiler, he's also on the board for the Museum of Neon Art, which I believe
Yeah.
is based in Glendale.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, he's kind of stopping doing it, but he was giving these tours of downtown LA on a double-decker bus called I think he called it the Neon Cruise. And so
Yeah.
he's a big historian and aficionado of old neon signage, that's in down. So this Neon Cruise rents a double-decker bus, drives you all through downtown LA, all through Wilshire and all through Hollywood, and you see this history of the city like in signage, but you're also seeing it from an elevated thing. And he's up there with a bullhorn. Anyway, so this is something that it's fascinating, right? It's just
Yeah.
I could talk about it for an hour.
Yeah. No, it's
It's
good. I got that curiosity bug from my mom too, and the
uh
intelligence. But when you articulated what you learned from Rowley, that's amazing, because I just read in one of the Robert Town obits, because the author of Chinatown just died, the
mm,
screenwriter, and
mm,
he said student of life. He says that
mm.
this genre already existed, but I kind of applied life to it. So I like that. Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Yeah, it's funny we talk about this. I'm pretty much I don't want to say an atheist, but I'm pretty agnostic at this point in my life. But I grew up in a very conservative, very right wing, I would say, as much as I love my grandparents, somewhat repressive church. They identified as Plymouth Brethren, which go look that one up. But I think it's akin to Baptist. And then at a certain point, so this was actually a church my grandparents helped start in Fullerton. So my grandfather preached there at some time. So that was all, I have, some negative feelings about that. I have some positive feelings about that, but that was where religious wise. And then they moved us to a Presbyterian church in Irvine in the 80s. And that was a little bit better, but I think, I, again, I mentioned, the word orthodoxy before, and I
Yeah.
think it's really important, just like as people and human beings, to kind of take everything in and study everything and not have this really rigid philosophy
Yeah.
about, life. Life is not black or white, right? Like
Yeah.
life is, you can't just, put everything in the evil category and everything else in the good category. It's like things just don't work like that. So I
Yeah.
kind of think
Chris Spears,
orthodoxy is like a shortcut to thinking.
yeah, that's Pascal, the mathematician philosopher, was one of McLuhan's heroes, and he said, in order to understand anything, you have to know this end of the spectrum and that end and everything in between. Again, it's like
Yeah.
comprehensive big picture. So do you pray?
I believe in a higher power.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I try and put out positivity, but like,
Yeah.
do I pray to a God? Probably not. But I also think it's interesting that you bring this up, because I was talking with my girlfriend about this the other day and just saying, like, do you believe, what do you believe? And I'm like, I don't want to be so arrogant to think that, like, there isn't a higher power out there. And I
Yeah.
think that higher power takes different forms for different people. So,
Well,
but nothing specific, I'd say,
yeah.
right?
But William Blake says we become what we behold. And going back to your beginning, positiveness, if you behold positiveness, that is a positive energy force.
Yeah.
And if God does exist, what would you like God to
Is,
say?
isn't it, Jerry? Isn't it more we covet what we see?
Well, that's
Is,
another
is
way
the
to
root
put it.
is the root of
Covet,
that the more
covet,
negative
covet
that Blake
what
said?
we see. I like that. I'm going to look
And
that
I
one
only
up.
know, and I'm such a dork. I only know that because that's like from Hannibal Lecter and the Silence, because they reference William Blake throughout that, right?
Oh, I never watched
Oh
that
yeah.
movie, and I
Oh yeah.
didn't
Look
know.
at look at the whole Red Dragon series, and like William Blake features heavily in that. Yeah.
Wow, that's heavy.
Yeah.
Well,
Anyway, sorry I interrupted you. Good.
no, it's really been fun, and I appreciate everything you've been saying, Chris. I learned a lot. And the question is, if God does exist, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
I'm so sorry.
And I get that
That's
answer. I
horrible.
like that. You
That's
want
so
him,
negative.
you want
That's so
him to say,
negative.
no,
No,
you want him. Yeah, but you like God to say to you, I'm sorry. I get that answer.
well, because, like, oh my God, this gets into, like, Buddhism and the concept that
Yeah,
life is suffering, right? Because it is to a certain extent, right? I mean, like, I talk to both my kids and I'm like, hey, here's this like awful thing that you're going through or you're trying to deal with, and I'm
yeah,
sorry to be like the bearer of bad tidings, but like this is like stuff, like, as a grown up you're going to have to deal with your whole life, whatever that
yeah, yeah,
thing is. And so, so like, where do we, like, so I think we want, like, as humans, or if you do believe in a higher power or God, or whatever, you believe
yeah,
in, I think there's this like deep desire to have things make sense,
yeah,
and things just don't necessarily always make sense. So if there is a God and we do die and we do see him, that's where my I'm sorry, or like I would like some explanation as
yeah,
for, you know,
yeah.
where,
No, I
like,
like,
what is it, was it Norman Vincent Peale who did the, like, why do bad things happen to good people book?
yeah.
Um
Well, he wrote Power of Positive Thinking, I think.
that it? Who
I
wrote you're right. Who wrote, and maybe it's just a phrase, maybe it's not the title of a book, but like why bad things happen to good people,
yeah,
like why do they? And it's like, and it's just where I'm at in my life, is like things just happen.
yeah,
And yeah, we have a certain amount of agency and we can twist certain things to our will,
yeah.
right? I mean, look at what politicians do. Look what's look what's just happening, in
Oh God,
politics and with the Supreme Court, like,
yeah,
over the last couple of weeks, and like, a small group of people with a great amount of power pushing things to their will, right? Like, you're, making
how
making
did that
making
happen?
things happen. What's that?
I thought, how did that happen? Don't we have some sort of say over this? I mean, it's
Well, this
like,
is what I mean. I mean, like, this is like, this is like, gets into like, life is chaos to a certain
yeah,
extent. It's
yeah,
actually amazing. It's like the commute I do coming home, going to work and coming home every night. Like, my commute is sometimes 2 hours each way. Anyway, it's
ooh,
because there are all these, it's partially, it's because there's all these accidents, right? There's like law of
yeah,
statistics. There's going to be a certain amount of accidents with a certain amount of people on the road all at once.
yeah,
I'm still, as annoying as that is and frustrating as that is, I'm amazed there's not more accidents, right? Like, I'm
exactly,
amazed there's not. And so to a certain extent, things are just chaotic,
yeah,
right? and what's going on with politics right now. And a lot of this stuff is just out of our control. And I think that's very frustrating as humans for most people. It's like, if there's something that you're frustrated about and it's completely out of your control, I think a lot of people who believe in very very orthodoxy, like, I believe what the Bible says 100%, and like that's all it, right? Like, so you believe this very like stringent thing because you want things to make sense, right? Like you want things to have, there's got to be a reason for something. So this is why I say, like, when like, if there's not a reason for things, but there is some omnipotent, control of these things, like I would really like to know why.
Yeah.
But maybe that
Hello.
doesn't help. Maybe that just things are what they are, and
Yeah.
you have to. So this gets back to my thing about like how the only control that you really have is like, how are you going to handle it? How are you going to, and are you going to pass negativity down to people? Or are you going to pass positivity down to people? Are you going to judge people harshly, or are you going to have like a spirit of compassion and forgiveness? And maybe like, even if you can't see yourself relating to someone, how you got to be able to relate to someone on some way, right? Like you've got to be able to,
Well,
I
again,
don't know.
you
I think because otherwise, if we're out there as humans spewing negativity, it just creates this cycle, right?
no.
And I'm not interested in being part of a negative cycle if I can help it. Not that I don't complain and bitch like everyone else does, because I
But
do.
but but it's beautiful. Power positive thinking exists, I believe 100%. That's how I was raised. I think we're both raised that way, and it is
Mm.
a better way than to be depressive, in my opinion. But
Mm.
you anticipated again, Chris, the next question. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Yeah, boy. Again, you got to get into like, what's your definition of evil? But yeah, I think evil people exist. I
Yeah,
think there are people who are sociopathic at nature, and maybe that's a direct result of how our culture is at large, or maybe it's just a result of growing up in a really bad abusive environment. But there are people who are just, they're going to be out there all for themselves 100% all the time. So I think if you're going
yeah,
to define evil, someone who's out there basically a narcissistic sociopath out there for themselves 100%, then yeah, that's what, I don't know. It gets in the idea of like a social contract. It's like, if you're a human being, if you've been blessed enough to be sentient and be able to walk around and live, and yeah, a lot of life is hard, but like a lot of life is pure joy too, right? Like a lot of life
exactly.
is like incredible. And so for those moments that are incredible, I think how we karmically pay that back is by putting that positivity out there and showing compassion for people. I think it's
Good,
important.
because really, really well done, Chris. Because the hidden question there is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? Sort of like if your kid comes home,
Mm,
I've been bullied. What do I do, Dad? But I want to
mhm.
set it up with a few modern thinkers. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob in The Samurai, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And
Mm.
Fellini says, I need an enemy. So again, it's a lot of thought. The basic question is, how do you
Yeah,
advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you
yeah,
respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
yeah. I would say sometimes you have no choice but to acknowledge your
Yeah,
enemy. And I don't even like to think of people as enemies, right? Like I think that's an inherently negative
yeah,
thing. But
yeah.
of all those phrases, I like the JFK the one the most, just because
Yes, that's good. And
I think
thanks for being a good listener.
there's always compassion. There's always, I'm I think, but also like, you don't want to be completely naive, right? There are some people who
Yeah,
have bad motivation and are maybe out to get you, or maybe they're just out to get everything for themselves and they don't care who they run over in the process.
yeah,
So you can't be naive,
yeah,
I would say, or
yeah.
you're gonna regret it if you're not paying attention and you're naive about things.
Well, I asked for 90 minutes, Chris. It's almost there, but I would love to
Mm.
schedule a part 2 because we really got deep and there's so much more we want to get into, like your books and your whole pursuit of taking architecture, your desire to draw, and then mixing it with architecture and then becoming this historian researcher and putting out these amazing books. But I wanted to close out this part 1 with a question that follows up the last one. And it's Nassim Taleb said, games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real
Mm.
life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. And
Hmm.
my friend said, well, villains don't think they're bad. They want control.
Mhm.
Heroes want freedom. And then
Mhm.
Gregory Bates, an anthropologist, says if the criminal gets caught, does he go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, oh, I did something morally and socially wrong? So
Mm.
again, it's a lot of prompts. The basic question is, does punishment work?
Mm. Sometimes,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, I certainly like I don't want to devolve into like a whole conversation about the current state of politics because that way madness lies. I'm trying to have less political debates with people these days just because everything's so heated and it's hard to have a civil conversation. But
yeah,
I would like to think that if you're asking does punishment work in the sense that punishment is not just punitive in nature but actually like meant to be like a learning lesson or a
yeah,
teaching moment about like,
yeah,
hey, did you stop to think in your, I don't know, your robbery spree that maybe you stole someone's life savings,
yeah,
and did you think about how that would feel to them and how that impacted them, and maybe they didn't have enough money for groceries? I don't know, I'm just making something up obviously, but the idea that people who do bad things or break the law, it's hard because there's a base human desire to see people hurt. If someone doles out what we consider hurt, right?
yeah,
There's a base human desire to see that person hurt in kind.
yeah,
And but I think if you think of it like, logically, what you really want is you want that person to think about what they did and go, "Oh wow," and then the consequences were really bad. I'll never do it again. I think
yeah,
it feels like with most people, all they care about is the consequences and aren't really necessarily thinking or like, oh God, I got caught.
yeah.
You know, so
Well,
I don't think I answered your question, and I don't know if I have an answer to the
but,
question that punishment. I think it works for some people.
yeah,
It just depends on where your headspace is at, and are
but I
you like
think
a
you're
narcissist?
stressing learning lesson was a good thing because we
Yeah.
know that punishments existed from the beginning of time, and a lot of people just go, no, it doesn't work. Well, what are you going to do? Rehabilitation is what you're talking about what you did and understanding the consequences. But one thing you said that really evoked the American Indians, the indigenous natives say your enemy is your best teacher. So you can learn from this experience, and if Trump gets thrown in jail, cannot run for president, writes a book and says, I'm sorry, I did wrong, would you forgive him?
Mm. That's such a like talking about Trump and like the state of our
I know it's a
politics right now,
stupid.
Jerry.
I didn't want
No,
to
it's
end.
not. It's not stupid. I'm a pretty progressive person,
Yeah,
and I'm not going to answer your question because I don't think there is a satisfactory answer to that
yeah,
question, Jerry. But here's
yeah,
here's what I'll say. I grew up and still live in Orange County. It's pretty conservative. It's pretty
yeah,
right wing generally. I'm not. Here's what I miss. I miss having civil discussions with people who have a different political viewpoint than me.
yeah,
And I miss having a measured, non emotional
yeah,
conversation with people where we can just say, well, I believe this because of this.
Yeah.
And someone else goes, well, I don't believe this. I believe this because of this. And we can talk about, we can still like each other. We can still appreciate each
Yeah.
other. There are still things that like, we might enjoy doing together. There's
Yeah.
not this visceral hate, like
Yeah.
so this is why when you said the word evil before, and like, you're evil and I want to destroy you. So the state of, and this gets into the bigger thing about the internet and social media, and how it's funny because like again, this was a conversation I had with my girlfriend the other day, but like, we talk about like, I grew up in the 70s, and in the 70s, you had news, you had the nightly news, and like,
Yeah.
you had Walter Cronkite and Tom Brokaw, right? And like the vibe was, and maybe people who are my kids' age can't relate to this or understand this, but like,
Yeah.
there are three channels, right? Three main channels.
Yeah.
And you saw the nightly news. And if someone was on the nightly news, or someone was like Walter Cronkite, you're like, oh, that person's an authority. That person's on TV. So that person should be trusted and to be impartial, and to be like not, and to be giving me information that is factual. And by the way, I may have my own personal opinion, but like I consider, let's just say Walter Cronkite, in types of social status up here, and I'm somewhere in here, right? So what social media has done has taken everyone in the world and gone, well, there's people who have trained for years and trusted entities and whatever, and everyone from people in government to people in science to people in technology to movie stars. So then like, so now you're like here. So like, in the 1970s, if like Lee Majors, who played the $6 Million Man, is this famous actor, and I'm this guy here, now take everything and like everyone's up here. Everyone's on the equal playing field. Everyone's voice is the same. Everyone's the star of their own movie. Everyone's got, right, so it's like, and so what happens is now when everyone's voices are at the same level and there's no one who's kind of trusted, you're just able to take your own reality and kind of tweak it, right? So whatever you believe, if you believe in super right-wing politics or you believe in super left-wing politics, people are just like, it's orthodoxy again. It's orthodoxy. And I just think having such a rigid, you're evil, you're bad conversation, it's a shortcut to thinking.
It is.
And and I get why people do it, because it's easier, right? It's like easier to just say what that person believes is effed, and F them, and they're evil and bad, and they should be canceled, or they should be gone, or that person's woke, and so that person is evil and bad, and that, you know what I mean? And it's like what, so, and what's really happening here is people are so angry at each other in terms of politics, but everyone's being manipulated by large corporations that are encouraging the social media, because the anger, the engagement of people who are angry at each other pays more in terms of eyeballs, and gets more commercial time, and so it's like everyone's being manipulated to a certain extent. And it's starting to feel to me like the only solution is just to like not play with that. So like I was fairly engaged with social media when, I don't know, 10 years ago, 15
Yeah.
years ago. I still do Instagram. I still have a Facebook account, but I don't ever post on it. I rarely post on Instagram. And it's only things that are like art or photography related. Like I never talk about politics
Yeah.
purposefully, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to get like in a huge fight with someone who I actually like or care. You know what I mean? Like
Totally.
and so I don't know where I'm going with all this,
Well,
Jerry, but
it's because
I'm very concerned with like, where we are as
yeah.
humans, and how we're being manipulated by large corporations that are just trying to extract as much money as possible. And I'm a
Yeah.
hypocrite because I work for large corporations, right? Because I love theme park design and I love designing amazing attractions, and that's something I love doing. And I'm just, if I could humble brag, I'm really good at it, right? Um,
You're you're really
so
good at it.
I'll
You're
talk
also
about what's
yeah.
that? Sorry, go ahead.
You're
Sorry, I'm
you're
kind of
you're really
ranting,
good.
but
No, but that's all right. Yeah, that's what I want. That is
mm,
exactly what I want, Chris, because you're really good at that, but you're also good at talking in articulating why you don't do social media so much right now, because you've developed what's called critical thinking skills, and you know
Oh,
what's called media literacy. It's like you
yeah.
know how to read between the lines, and that's important because I learned once this line: the revolution is two people talking. So that's
Mm,
just us talking, whether we chose to focus on this subject or that, has sussed out a lot of ideas for me. I just want to
mm,
tell you that in regards to forgiveness,
mm.
you know, Mark Twain said that forgiveness is the smell the flower gives off when the foot steps on it. So again, it's sort of like this amazing thing. Like, how do we deal? I learned this from my sister. How do you deal with what you don't like about the other person or the other party?
Yeah.
So you're like, say, hey, I want to be your friend. We can share our views on photography, but we not necessarily have to go into the political realm talking.
Mhm.
That's fine. It's like you're finding the humanity, and back to your theme is, power of positive thinking. I think it's important,
Mm.
you know.
Well, I can't, and then maybe it's because I probably ingest too much like news podcasts, and I'm seriously thinking about after this election, like, regardless of whatever way it goes, just listening, because I'm trapped in my car a lot, I listen to podcasts a lot, and just listening to things that are so like that history of rock and roll in 500 songs, which again I cannot recommend more strongly. It's
Yeah.
fascinating. Or things that are based in history, or things that are based in art, or thing, that, or listen to fiction books on tape, or something, something that's not going to make me have a sense of dread and
Yeah.
anger at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I think that's low key what's going on a lot. And I think social media is behind a lot of that. And it's really unfortunate because I've met and I know people that I would not have known, other than social media. Right.
Yeah.
There's one of my absolute favorite musicians named Andy Preboy, and
Yeah.
he was in the band Wall of Voodoo. He's
Oh, yeah.
he's he's not as well known as Stan Ridgway, who was the original singer, but he's the second singer. He's an absolute god smacking, like, just like, I can't let God, I'm sorry, god smacking, gobsmackingly amazing
Yeah.
talent. um Everything he writes I'm such a fan of, and I would have not met him if it hadn't been for social media, right? Like, we struck up a friendship somehow, amazingly.
Cool.
So there is positivity, but I don't know, like, I don't know. This is getting, you're making me think about just negativity in general, like, as
I
a
don't want
whole.
I want to reflect your positiveness, but
Well,
I
I mean, I'm not perfect at it, right?
yeah,
I don't think anyone
yeah,
is, but I think if you have that mindset,
yeah,
it's almost like it colors how your interactions with everyone are
yeah,
every day. And
yeah,
then that filters out to the people that you've interacted with, and then they tentacle out, and you would hope you're cross-pollinating positivity, right?
yeah,
You're hoping that maybe there's someone you work with who's like stuck in a bad marriage, right? And just going home every night is hell. And maybe this person's taking it out on their kids or whatever. And maybe if you're the one person who has a positive interaction with that person that day, that's making a positive interaction happen down the line, as opposed to, like, if you're going to be snarky because, I don't know, because someone cut you off, driving in, or the store was out of the Twinkies you wanted, or I don't know, whatever stupid
yeah,
thing. You know what I mean? Like, you can spread the positivity, you can spread the negativity. It's a
yeah.
choice.
It's a choice. Well,
Yeah.
Chris, this really been enlightening, and I really appreciate it. I do
Yeah.
encourage people to pursue your three existing books, and we look
No,
forward
thanks.
to the two or three new projects you're working
Yeah.
on.
Thank
So
you.
let's plan a part two. It might be 3, 4, 5 months down the line, but then we can
Sure.
get deeper into the background on your creativity in becoming,
Sure.
artist, Cal Arts, what a unique profession, theme park designer. I mean, that's
Yeah.
like epitome, like I said, of art and science. and more important, how articulate you are as a historian, because
Oh, well,
when
thanks.
I saw
Yeah,
your
I mean, it is, I would say, to your point, like, it's one of the things I love about it is that it's a collaborative
yeah,
art form, right?
yeah.
Like film, like you can't, like, not, no one person can do this stuff. You have to work with a team of people. And there are people I work with that my jaw drops. I'm so like, you're a genius. I'm working with you on this thing. Yeah, so,
Well, your presentation at Venice Heritage Museum was so enlightening for so
oh,
many
thank
of
you.
us, because
Thank
it
you.
was visually, and having someone talk to you as you're staring at these visuals. It was so good. So, Chris,
It's
we
how
will.
not, it's, yeah, it's POP is the story of how not to do a theme park. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much once again, and let's plan part two. Chris, that was really
All
been a
right.
delight. Even though
Great.
I'm going to hit, even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button now, I hope this
Mm,
never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever.
okay. Thank you. All right. Bye.